Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest look back at talking heads over the past week. Flight operators, drone attacks and new MHKs were all up for discussion. But first, one of the biggest news stories of the week. Over to Stu Peters.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
What part should the Isle of Man play in dealing with the migrant crisis in Europe? The UK government has come under increasing pressure to accept more refugees. And today it's reported David Cameron is expected to announce that 10,000 Syrian refugees will be allowed into Britain. Meanwhile, Austrian officials say emergency measures, which have allowed thousands of migrants to travel freely from Hungary to Western Europe, will be phased out. Over the weekend, more than 18,000 travelled over the border and then took trains to Germany. Here in the Isle of Man, the One World Centre says the island should welcome migrants to its shores amid the crisis. Centre Chairman Phil Crane says a recent call from the Chamber of Commerce to increase the island's population by 15,000 means we should send a message to migrants that they're welcome here. What role should the Isle of Man play in supporting those affected by the humanitarian crisis in Syria? Is donating aid the responsible thing to do? Or could the island do more? Maybe you think it's something that the island should stay out of altogether. Comments: we can't afford to look after the people on this island properly now. How do the do-gooders propose we look after all these refugees? Are they prepared to put their hands in their own pockets and fund this huge humanitarian effort? I don't see the USA or many of the fellow Arab nations queuing up to help. Well, it's far enough away that the USA, I don't suppose, would, but, I mean, the USA is built of immigrants, isn't it? Still, regarding refugees, firstly, wouldn't ISIS find a way of increasing its attacks on the UK, and heaven forbid, here on the island, as retribution for taking these people in? Secondly, if the island take in refugees, what would that mean for work permit requirements, or would the work permit requirements simply be dropped for the migrants? Asks Pip. Valid questions, yeah. Hi Stu, listening to all the contributions about the migrants or refugees and population needs aside, where are they going to live? How are we going to educate their children? My son's class in year 1 was 42. 42? That's a fail, isn't it, on behalf of government? People should think a bit more about the repercussions of increasing the population, says Nick. Yeah, 42 is too big for a class size, surely. Stu, if we let these poor families into the island, then issue them with limited-term citizenship, making it clear that they don't have the right to stay and must leave when requested, even if the children are born here, says Pete. I don't know that you can do that, Pete, and I don't know that you would want to do that necessarily. You know, people have got, surely, a right to put down roots, and, you know, for them to be able to do that and then say, oh, and by the way, in 5 years you're going to have to do one and go somewhere else. I don't think that that would be necessarily fair. But, like I say, I'm pretty much on the fence about this. I can see both sides of the argument, I think. Stu, the difficulty I see most clearly is defining an economic migrant from a refugee. It must be dire at home to want to come to England, says somebody who, I can't make out the name on that one. Manx government can't afford to pay for our children's university fees, so how do we expect to pay for the upkeep and education of any refugees, says Pat. Well, I mean, people would say, Pat, that, you know, when you're talking about life and death, then that's more important than university fees. And I'm not saying necessarily that I agree with that, but, you know, I think you're comparing chalk with cheese there. Somebody else called, you don't have to show your passport to get a ferry over here, and how many Eastern Europeans have we got over here now that are illegal immigrants? There are no controls over them if they come over on the boat. Well, they're probably not illegal immigrants, are they? I mean, that's what the work permit system is there to try and dissuade. It's not like the airlines where you have to show your passport. I thought you did have to show your passport now on the boat. Hi, Stu. The West made the mess of all these Middle Eastern countries, and although they were run extremely strictly, the countries were held together. America, assisted by Britain, have wrecked these areas and left them in tatters. I think we're obliged to help these poor people, says Marty. Cool. Okay, let's go to the lines, and we've got Jeff on. Hello, Jeff.
I do agree with Mark. I feel we're rather closing our eyes to something and hoping it'll go away, and it probably won't. And I do feel we should give some serious consideration towards practical help and what that entails, and reaching out to other people. I see them more as refugees and economic migrants. I think they've been painted as economic migrants to try to shut them out.
Yes.
And we've had a tradition in the British Islands for hundreds of years of giving refugees some space in our culture. We did that during the last World War and on many other occasions since then.
Of course, but I mean, let me just ask you the question though, Jeff. How do you explain then the scenes at Calais where people who are refugees from a war-torn state get as far as France, but that's not enough? They want to then get to Britain. Surely if you're a refugee, you want to get to the first safe haven, don't you?
Well, I mean, I think many of them are, I understand, settling in France or other European countries. I think if you put a barrier in the way in terms of police, authorities, tear gas and that sort of thing, then that is a challenge and a threat, and people may well fight against it.
Yeah.
I don't think for many of them their sole aim is to get into the UK. The UK itself is in a pretty sad state at the moment financially. Our son, who's currently living with us, is a refugee from London because he felt he couldn't survive there any longer with the noise, the danger in traffic, the economic madness of accommodation and prices people are paying.
Oh, I couldn't live there for a week.
There are a lot of refugees in the UK that are refugees from London to other parts of the world, including the Isle of Man. And I do agree with you, Stuart, that we're all migrants. We all move around. It's part of being human. And I think we should open our minds to the fact, rather than just saying no, 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 which is all I hear from so many people. It's rather sad.
All right. Thank you very much for your call, Jeff. Back to the lines. We've got James on. Hello, James.
Firstly, I was just my initial thing was we've got some very, very rich Arab countries out that way.
Yeah, we have.
Mega rich. None of them are taking refugees. Not at all. My personal opinion is we will never, ever, ever sort it out by taking refugees. We have to put boots on the ground. I don't like the idea. It's necessary because ISIS will continue to grow, continue to create an area there, which is a power base.
Yeah.
When they've established themselves, they'll move on out. Egypt will probably be the next thing they'll try to destabilise. They'll move on then from there to the countries around them. Give it 25, 30 years, and it'll be a repeat, like I said to Catherine, of the El Cid routine and the Moors coming across. They'll be fighting in France.
Gotcha.
With proper armies.
Okay.
And on it will go because they have one ambition, and that's to put their idea of their religion, if you can call it that. They have no other object except to put that throughout the whole world.
Yeah.
It's worrying. People don't realise. Everyone's feeling sorry for refugees. They don't realise the powder keg that's out there, and it needs dealing with. We have to use our troops. Obama needs to get some backbone and put troops out there, because it's the only way.
Sort out the Islamic State and
that's right.
Yeah,
and
solve
everybody
the problem
can go
that
home.
way. Yeah, I mean, you talk about religious fervour and all the rest of it, and we invented that, really, didn't we? With the Crusades, the Christians have got a similar history, so you can't be surprised when it comes back and bites you in the bottom, I don't suppose.
I know we can't, but you've got to realise this. Know it and deal with it.
Yeah.
We're going to have to destroy ISIS, and that's the only. Nothing else can do but do that.
All right. Thank you very much, James. Michael called. I agree with a lot of what everybody's saying, but people have short memories. I remember when I was at school, the globe was red. We went out and conquered it all. Yeah, in the name of Christianity as well. It happens. We all have our history. Yeah, good point. We have 3 adopted children, 3 foreign rescue dogs, 2 locally adopted dogs and 1 homegrown dog. My house is full. However much I'd like to help, isn't the UK the same as my situation, i.e. full, just on a much larger scale? We can only do so much before we impact negatively on our own home country, says Sarah. Yep. Distressing as the media pictures of young children who tragically drowned were, I found them no more distressing than those which emanated some years ago out of the African state Rwanda, where murder was committed under the cover of ethnic cleansing. Similarly, those images which emanated from the Balkans, where again ethnic cleansing was persecuted. I'm perplexed that as the family in question had made landfall in Turkey, a Muslim country, where they felt it necessary not to settle or regroup there before seeking permanent asylum via more orthodox means. What happened to the moral obligation in respect to the human rights of those unfortunate people in Rwanda and the Balkans? Even the presence of the United Nations didn't even count for anything and was in effect nugatory in their ultimate protection. So we are supposed to feel morally obligated to take in thousands of refugees who, by the scenes at the railway stations, would not even avail themselves to being officially processed. I feel David Cameron has the right attitude in taking candidates for asylum from the camps and who do not have the wherewithal to pay people smugglers. Ever thought that those boat accidents are conveniently staged irrespective of the tragic consequences? The money goes into IS funds. Some interesting thoughts there from Chris. Thank you, Chris. There seems to be confusion between economic migrants and refugees. Should we allow in qualified doctors and professionals and let the rest die? Gosh, so many questions and so few answers, but I think that I'm not alone in that. I think the politicians have got very few answers about this either.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Are drone strikes an acceptable weapon in combating potential terror threats? The UK Prime Minister is facing questions over the decision to carry out a drone strike in Syria which killed 2 Islamic State fighters from Britain. David Cameron says the move was justified on the grounds of self-defence, as one of the men was linked with a series of terrorist plots. The unprecedented strike went ahead without the prior approval of the UK Parliament. Defence Secretary Michael Fallon says their position was clear. Are drone strikes the right course of action in combating terror plots? Or could they serve to strengthen the resolve of those planning terrorist attacks on British soil? Hi, Stu, don't see why you have to go through red tape to hit ISIS. They don't. When we're in danger, they need taking out, says Kev. OK. Was it legal for ISIS to behead hostages? No, of course not. Get over there and bomb them, then round up any suspected radicals, fly them out there and drop them from a great height, says Mark. Nice to know that we're all being reasonable about it. I agree with drone strikes. This lot are rubbish and should be treated as such, says Ray. You kill one terrorist, you create 100 more. Now, there's something that's worth discussing. Is that the problem with this? And what about the legality of it? I mean, this is all based on the fact that these 2 fellas that they hit with the drone were suspected of plotting all sorts of terrible things, according to the UK newspapers. They were targeting the Queen or the VE Day celebrations or whatever. They were planning some sort of a mass atrocity in the UK. The only trouble is, it's not that long ago since British intelligence sources told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which, caused us to launch a war and go in there and have the greatest minds in the universe comb through every grain of sand in Iraq and fail to find anything. So, it all depends on whether or not the intelligence was right or not. And just because the government says that it was right, it doesn't necessarily mean it was. I'm sorry, Stu, but ISIS are indiscriminate when they bomb innocent people, so why should the British government be worried that drone strikes are not a fair way to fight the enemy? It's also been confirmed that amongst the fleeing poor refugees are many hundreds of ISIS terrorists who will lie low for a while before they kill innocent people again. Wipe them all out, I say. I don't know what the answer is, says Alan, but the eye for an eye tactics have still not stopped the troubles in the Middle East, especially in Israel. I don't think that as a tactic ever works anywhere, does it? Stu can't understand why there seems to be an uproar about the drones killing British terrorists. Anybody who thinks these actions were wrong should pack up the bags and families and go and live amongst them. They'll have no freedom of speech, movement or thought, and if they disagree with ISIS, they'll probably have no head either. We've already witnessed the atrocities these people commit against foreigners and their own people. The last one to behave like this committed suicide in a Berlin bunker. There's no place in society for these scum, says Mal. Brian called, in my estimation, the government was right to take the action it did, but saying that, how many terrorists are there in the refugees that the UK's been asked to take in, possibly here in the Isle of Man? This should be looked at as well. OK. Stu, could you do a drone strike on John O's working in Ramsey? Hey, listen, if he's working in Ramsey, then no, we need people working. That's the whole point. Let's go to the lines. We've got Ian on. Hello, Ian.
I've been giving this some thought since listening to your programme yesterday.
OK.
And several thoughts occurred to me. One, in your and my lifetime, when Idi Amin was tyrannising Uganda, there was an Asian refugee crisis, and Britain took a large number of Asian refugees from Uganda.
Yeah.
Most of them were in fact educated Asians, and the result of that, although people had a lot of misgivings at the time, was a very large number of very successful businesses employing thousands of indigenous British people as a result of that influx of immigrants.
Sure.
So not all immigration is necessarily harmful.
Yeah.
Second point I would observe is many of the refugees just outside Syria, from Syria, are indeed Syrian Christians. If the Isle of Man was to take a proportionate number of refugees equivalent to what the UK has volunteered to take, which at the moment the suggested figure is 20,000,
Yes.
that in practice in the Isle of Man would mean something of the order of 120 people, maybe 30 families.
Yes.
As the benefactor, i.e. we're the people providing the refuge, I think it's quite fitting that we should have the option to say, yes, we will take Christian families. Secondly, we would prefer Christian families where at least one family member has a good working knowledge of English.
Yes. Okay.
From the security concerns, the fact is, if we put them up here, put them in housing here, I see no reason why our Manx government cannot ensure that the communication providers on the island, and we've only a very limited number, give details to the government of these people, and the government can require them to log the communications or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, to make sure that they're not up to anything that they shouldn't be.
Exactly, yes.
All right, some good ideas there, Ian. Thank you very much for your call.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast, featuring highlights from the programme over the past week.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Does it matter which company operates the aircraft which provide passenger services from the Isle of Man? Flybe says a deal confirmed with Stobart Air will improve its service to passengers on early morning flights from Ronaldsway. From the 25th of October, Stobart will have 2 ATR aircraft based on the island. They'll take on all flying to Stansted and the early morning departures on the Liverpool and Manchester routes. In what's known as a wet lease deal, Flybe will in effect rent planes and crew from Stobart, and they'll still be Flybe branded, and booking procedures via the Flybe website will remain the same. Does it matter who operates the planes that provide services from Ronaldsway? Could the new arrangement offer advantages to passengers, or are you sceptical about the longevity of the situation? Hi Stu, Stobart are doing Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham from the end of October, a 3-year plan with reduced capacity when the ATR 42 is in use. Yes, it's down from 78 to I think 72 seats, isn't it, compared to what we've got at the moment. Hey boy, will the prices be the same though, says G. I expect so. I can't imagine, and I've not seen anything that says that the prices are going up. And prices never go down, G. We know that, don't we? Does it matter whether or not somebody other than the people who've got their name on the aeroplane are the actual operators of it? I think it's becoming more and more common in the aviation industry, isn't it? It used to be a case that if it was a British Airways aeroplane, it was crewed by BA people. The aeroplane was owned by BA, but I think that over recent years, the whole model has changed quite dramatically. Somebody called and said, initially, I think this has got to be considered good news. I've had to fly to the UK 6 times this year, and 5 of those flights were with Flybe. All 5 were delayed. Yes, I've heard that. It seems to be happening all the time for operational issues rather than technical issues. Hopefully this will allocate the right planes to the right routes and help prevent those delays. Overall, departure times and arrival times for Flybe are not very good. Yes, I've heard them called Fly Maybe. I must admit, whether or not that's fair or not, I don't know how their record compares with other operators. This from Jim made me laugh. I suppose you realise that Stobart's backup is a couple of Arctics with fridge trailers. Yeah, green ones as well, I would think, Jim. Yeah, good. I'm guessing it's the same firm. Pam says, just out of curiosity, is Stobart Air in relation to the famous Eddie Stobart? I'm guessing it's part of the same group, yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing it's part of the same group. I am indebted to our correspondent, John W., our regular correspondent, John W., who's been doing a bit of Googling on our behalf, and he's come up with the website, which is all the W, Stobart Group, one word, .co.uk. He says Stobart is a diverse group going way beyond the well-known trucks, and they're deeply involved in aviation and rail. Thank you, John W. And this is a good thought. This could be good, as there will probably be a level of service contract between Flybe and Stobart, with the possibility of financial penalties if services fall down. A good incentive for them to be on time. That's from Charles. That's a very good thought, Charles, actually. Yeah, I'd not thought of that. And BB says Aer Lingus uses Stobart to fly from Dublin to the Isle of Man. Yes, I think that was mentioned in the interviews earlier as well. Yes, it does indeed.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
should there be a further review of the island's population projections in relation to future housing needs? The Chamber of Commerce is raising serious questions about the figures used in a major plan for future housing across the island. It says projections for population growth in the draft strategic plan don't match the government's aspirations to grow the economy. The plan, which will form a blueprint for long-term housing development, goes to a public inquiry later this month. The government says the working population needs to increase by 500 to 1,000 people a year if targets in Vision 2020, which was agreed by Tynwald, are to be met. But according to Chamber Chief Executive Jane Deller, the housing needed for such an expansion is not catered for in the plan. Should the government review its population growth predictions? Is there a need for more housing in the island if the anticipated growth in population materialises? Let's go to the lines. We've got Neil on. Hello, Neil.
I'm actually concerned about the viewpoint from the Chamber of Trade and Commerce.
Right.
I mean, do they really want to cover the Isle of Man in lots of little housing estates? If you look down now from the top of the mountain or you're out cycling somewhere, the Central Valley in particular, it's beginning to look like Legoland. And it's all very well bringing thousands of people in here, which they say will bring economic growth. But at the same time, you have to enhance the service sector. You have to provide hospitaling, schooling, all the extra services which require population sustaining. I personally think that the Isle of Man should grow its economy through tourism.
Right.
My reason for saying that is that we've had a vibrant tourism in the past. There is no reason why we can't have a vibrant tourism in the future. We have a wonderfully green, environmentally friendly island. There are lots and lots of activities which people can do in conjunction with our natural environment. They come to the island, they stay in a hotel or a boarding house or a small guest house, etc., or go self-catering. They spend their money here, they enjoy the countryside, and then they clear off.
OK, but I mean, let's just look at that, because normally I agree with you, Neil, but I don't know that I do this time. Why would people come to the Isle of Man, where we've got fairly iffy weather for most of the year, and it costs as much as going to somewhere that's nice where you're guaranteed sunshine?
Well, my answer to that is, why does Ireland have such a vibrant tourism sector? It's one of the main drivers of their economy in Ireland, and the Irish weather is pretty much the same as the Isle of Man.
It is.
They go there for peace and quiet. They go there for the green countryside. They go there for countryside pursuits such as fishing, walking, hiking, etc., cycling, and that is their success game. Isn't
one of the main sort of drivers of the tourist economy in Ireland people from America coming back to rediscover the roots, though?
Well, there is, but I mean, you get a certain amount of that here. But I'm appalled to think that they want to increase the population by 15 or 20,000 or whatever it is.
Well, that's the government, remember. I mean, you're blaming the Chamber of Commerce for it. This is the government that wants to increase the population.
Unfortunately, they are coercing the government. And in my experience here, there is a huge link between business people, senior executives, developers and members of government, and it's a link which I do not like. I think the government has become very, very right-wing, business-orientated, and something which emulated to me quite recently was when Jeremy Corbyn was speaking at one of his interviews, and he said, business should be the servant of society, not society the servant of business. And unfortunately, the Isle of Man, society is very much the servant of business, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful. OK, all right. It's always good to hear from you, Neil, even if I don't always agree with you. Thank you very much indeed for calling. There are plenty of empty properties on the island. Once there are enough new jobs to fill those with workers, we can consider building more houses, not before, says somebody anonymously. Don't panic and take too much notice of overpaid statisticians. Ask the removal man if you want to know what's going on. There are currently more people going than coming, says Leonard. Gosh, OK, thank you very much indeed. So the Manx people want another 15,000 more people here. Maybe we don't want or need this growth. It'll not do the average person in the street any good, just the bloated civil service pensions so that they can retire young and spend the rest of their lives being a millstone. That's a view that I've heard before. I don't know if it's a fair view or not, but I think a lot of people feel like that. Neil for Chief Minister, says somebody else. Dave says, I think Neil is living in cuckoo land. So, not saying that views get polarised on this programme. Stu, let's have a referendum to see if we need more inhabitants. There's a lot to consider. Don't rely on those with a vested interest, says Bill. OK. Stu, I'd like to downsize, but no suitable properties are being built for single people, says David H. Well, that's the trouble, when people get on and say, oh, there are lots of for sale signs up everywhere. That's all very well, but I mean, they're usually houses that certainly the lower paid couldn't afford to buy. So, and I think an awful lot of the ones that are sticking on the market are there because people won't take a realistic price for them. They've got this huge expectation of what the properties are worth, and that's why they're sticking on the market. Stu, yes, I have to say I do agree with
with Neil. Government do support business. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's business that actually drives the economy. Government just monitor it, really, and they can come up with various schemes and things, but it is business that keeps the economy going, so, they should support it. Certainly not retail, though, says Nick, as I made the point a couple of days ago when I said that support for retail is desperately needed. I also agree with Neil that an increase of 20,000 population would be disastrous. OK, fair dues. Banged on about this before, but tourism should concentrate on sport tourism, so people come over for an event. The TT is a great template for that. We have a huge pool of expertise in all the local sports clubs, but we're not using them properly. In the summer I was in Jersey for the Island Games. Think about it, if we had an equivalent of the Island Games every month. Regards from Chris. Thank you, Chris. I think that is kind of the way that the government is treating tourism, isn't it? It's trying to come up with all sorts of events and reasons for people to come over. I mean, I disagree with Neil. I can't imagine that the Isle of Man is ever going to get back to being a significant tourist destination, apart from people coming over for events like the TT, the Festival of Motorcycling or whatever. Further to Neil's point on tourism, we can contribute a lot more from agriculture. It just needs a small movement of the subsidies onto production as allowed by the EU. OK, I don't know about that. Chamber of Commerce can come and buy my house. I'm back off to England as soon as I sell my house. The cost of living here and the cost of... and the text runs out at that point. So that's somebody who wants the lights turned off. Hi, Stu. I'm sure since I moved here in 97, the population's increased, and bar the lazy ones, everybody else seems to have somewhere to live. Love the show, says Jonesy. Jonesy always says that he loves the show. Stu, the greatest leap forward for the man in the street has been after the plague and 2 world wars when the population goes down. OK, so a war or plague then. We need to increase our working population to support our ageing population to ensure their pensions, etc. are not cut. We therefore need to plan now in relation to houses and infrastructure. The gentleman talking about increasing tourism is absolutely right, but does he think we can cope with significantly more tourists without increasing the working population? With low levels of unemployment, how does he think we're going to service the needs of increased tourist numbers? The Chamber of Commerce can come and buy my house. Oh, this is a full version of the one that ran out before. Chamber of Commerce can come and buy my house if they need more houses. I'm off back to England. The cost of living here, the cost of getting on and off the rock is too expensive. Plus, I need a new hip and don't want to wait 18 months for a new one. That from Steve. Thank you, Steve. Well said, Neil. This is from somebody else. Constant growth is unsustainable. Eventually, our wonderful quality of life will disappear. The system of constant growth is flawed. I don't know what the answer is, but it needs to change, says Joan. The schools can't cope as it is. Peel kids have to do their A-levels in Douglas because the QE2 can't cope with the numbers, and they're still building more houses. Well, that's a political fail if that's true. I mean, somebody got in touch the other day. I don't know if it was... I think it was one of our regulars who said that their child was in a class of 42. That's a political fail, and that's what government ought to be concentrating on rather than things that they seem to concentrate on. But, I mean... That's the whole reason to have a government, to make sure that things like that don't happen, and because, to make sure that things that should work do. Secondly, this is from Pip again, who's obviously on one now. Secondly, in response to one of your texters, can I just say I'm a civil servant. I'm certainly not bloated. I can never afford to retire early, and looking at my mandatory pension contributions, I may be able to retire at the age of 80. I'm 40 plus, so I've got another 40 years or so to work. That's if I live that long, says Pip. Well, yes, OK. Stu, there will soon be 2 more properties on the market as myself and my girlfriend are moving to England. We both have our own businesses which turn over a good profit, but we're no longer willing to be taxed to the hilt to pay civil servant pensions or drive on the worst roads in Europe, says John. Wow, OK, thank you. Let that person go back to England, he'll end up paying more tax. I'm sick of hearing all this government pension rubbish, says Dave. Well, I think people have got a valid point about the pensions, but, people saying that they're going to move back to England because they don't like the Isle of Man. Well, crack on, really. Stu, the hospitals are not coping as it is, and if all these people come over to live here, how many babies will arrive over the next few years? The majority of them are young, so this has to be a foregone conclusion. In England, they've been struggling for years with hospitals and maternity due to the mass influx of people, but the elderly get the blame for living too long. I dread to think what the state of the island is going to be in a few years' time. If they do allow people to come in, it should be the people who've been living in a disgusting state in camps, not these people who look like some sort of them have just taken a short sail in a boat. I feel very sad for them, but I feel sad for my children and grandchildren too. Kind regards from Wendy G. Andrew called, to end this discussion on a positive note, I moved to the island from London a few years ago, and the quality of life here is extraordinary. People who knock the island and its health service should maybe go and live somewhere like London for a while and see what healthcare is like there. I agree. I can't understand people who move to the Isle of Man and then complain about the cost of getting off it. I mean, why would you move here if you constantly want to be getting off the island? Don't get that at all.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
What do you make of yesterday's House of Keys by-election results? The island now has 2 new MHKs filling the seats made vacant by the elevation of David Anderson and Tim Crookall to the Legco earlier this year. In Glen Faber, it was a very close result with just 3 votes in it. David Talbot secured 421 votes, whilst his opponent Geoffrey Boots secured 424. Meanwhile, in Peel, there was a much clearer margin for the victor. Ray Harmer secured 799 votes, that's 183 ahead of his nearest rival Leslie Anson. What do you make of the result? Is a year enough time to make a mark as a politician? What should the new MHKs hope to achieve during the next 12 months? And a couple of comments in. This from John W. He says, hello, Stu. All credit to your colleagues who covered the 2 counts and declarations yesterday evening in a thoroughly professional manner. But I was disappointed that Max Radio's ace election reporter was rested. You make one mistake and people just, I made one mistake when I was a TV producer, and crashed a motorbike making a road safety film. And that's all that people remember about that, those years of my life. And it's the same broadcasting for the radio. You make one mistake during an election and everybody remembers it forever. I had no vote yesterday, says John, so I had to rely on the electorate in the 2 constituencies to deliver me politicians who will look after my interests at local, national and international level. I wish them both well and that they'll hit the ground running constructively. That's nice. Thank you very much, John. Some good points in there. Somebody else called and said, congratulations to the winners. My only concern about last night was the talk of people being missing from the electoral register. In Peel, it probably wouldn't have made a difference, but if people were turned away in Glen Faber, then it really would have had an effect on democracy. I'm not saying which way it would have gone, but with it being so close, they really need to get hold of the electoral register with the news today about Brenda Cannell stepping down, and certainly before the general election in 2016. But commiserations to David Talbot. I hope he comes back, says whoever it was that got in touch on that. People don't seem to want party politics, says Derek. Well, that's a thought as well. Yeah, that's maybe a point. Do you think that maybe party politics is something that we all say would be a good thing in the Isle of Man until it comes to voting for them? And this in anonymously, it says, some of the MHKs have done nothing worthwhile in 4 years, so to do something in 1 is unlikely. I disagree. I would think that, first of all, you've got the new boy syndrome in that the 2 people elected last night will be very keen to make the mark. Stu, government seems to be doing its best to proscribe party politics in the island, but it's certainly time for a progressive modern Manx opposition to counter this worrying new blue agenda from Baron Boot, says William. Do you think he's got a worrying new blue agenda? OK, and what's this from Peter? Please, Stu, plays the clip again when you interviewed Adrian Earnshaw about his disappointment at not being an MHK. It still makes me giggle to this day, Stu, says Peter. Well, I've been through all the logs everywhere in Manx Radio to try and make sure that every iteration of that interview have been deleted, although Alex Brinley seems to be able to find it when it suits him. Stu, what's the point in these new MHKs having a manifesto to get elected when once they're elected they're told to sit in the corner and do as they're told by Alan Bell? Elections are pointless. Bell might as well choose who he wants. That's from Jim. I think you're wrong, Jim. The only power that the Chief Minister has got over new MHKs is the power to give them jobs within government. So as an MHK, you get the basic salary, 35 grand plus expenses and all the rest of it, so maybe 40 grand or something like that as a basic MHK. But then you get a decent hike of something like 50%, I think, if you are then put into a department, a political member of a department, or made a minister of whatever. And that's where Alan Bell has got power, in that he can put people into those positions. And to an extent, I suppose, it could be seen that that's the way that he can control people and make them do as he wants them to do. Otherwise, they face losing that extra income. But for 2 new MHKs, it's unlikely. I would have thought that they'd go straight into departments. I don't know. Maybe they will. So, we've got backbenchers already. We've got members of the Liberal Vannin Party who are, completely outside, if you like, of government in many ways and often vote against government. So these 2 new MHKs, they don't need to be beholden to Alan Bell or to government, council of ministers, unless they choose to be, I suppose. Presume Mr Boot will fit in with a lot of the MHKs because he's already good at winging it. But tish! Sorry, good luck to both of them. They're going to need it, says Ian. Thanks, Ian. Hi, Stu. Nothing will change with these 2 new MHKs. Maybe not for the want of trying, but the island is run by Alan Bell and the council of ministers, and the rest just make up the numbers. He's even filling the upper house with his yes men. 4 MHKs elected to Legislative Council. Democratic, I don't think, says John. Well, I disagree with you, John, but there you go.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
That's it for the latest look back at Talking Heads. Our thanks as ever to everyone who got involved in the programme. You can do the same by calling, texting or emailing between midday and 2 p.m. on weekdays, or you can join the debate on the Facebook page, Talking Heads with Stu Peters. You can listen back to each day's programme in full using the on-demand section of the Manx Radio website, and manxradio.com is also where you'll find a daily update of what's up for discussion. You can also keep up to date with what's on the programme by liking the Facebook page or following Stu Manx on Twitter. And if you'd like to suggest a topic for discussion, get it to us by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for now, so until next time, goodbye.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.